The space race, the competition of superiority and the future of technology, all started with a bitter disagreement between the Soviet Union and the United States of America during the aftermath of World War II. Over decades upon decades of countless races and stabs of victory, the intense battle between the partakers of this post-Allied relationship grew larger. This took a rather large heap of minds to advance upon these accomplished societies and slaughter the opponent nation. One fierce antagonism fueled the space race, more commonly known as the successful exploration outside of the planet. Both countries strived to have the smartest, most successful equipment and accomplishments in relation to this. From the surprising and shocking launch of the artificial Soviet satellite Sputnik to the astronautically and galactic workings of today, the space race had eventually placed the countries in a neutral relationship, making it an essentially recognized event in world history, and a logical extension of American motives and tradition of discovery and exploration. At the conclusion of World War II, tensions began to arise between the United States and Russia. These certain tensions created an infamous uprising of superiority in these two nations. Each nation wanted to seem smarter and more advanced than the other. The nuclear arms race encouraged the violent testing of dangerous and powerful nuclear weapons that could be used as warfare tactics. Branching off the nuclear arms race was another extremely crucial strain, the space race. The countries both wanted to accomplish exploration, and they knew that if they could explore a place that could have never been successfully reached, it would give them a major advantage in this competition. No one in the entire world had been able to reach this alien, endless creation, otherwise known as space, and it had never really been attempted to be accomplished before. Instantaneously, when the idea was created, the Soviet Union went to work trying to pursue this seemingly unreal journey. Because they couldn't let their competition reach their goal and succeed, the United States threw together a few ideas and plans. In the year 1957, the Soviet Union was successful in beating their opponent into space when they sent the first effective artificial satellite, Sputnik 1, into space. Sputnik 1 was a Soviet R-7 ballistic missile that sent concern across the pond to an unexpecting population. The 183.9-pound missile was capable of delivering a nuclear weapon due to its traveling ability, and this caused U.S. concern that the Soviets were able to attack them overseas. American civilians were defeated and panic-stricken when the news hit every home television set in the country. However, for some, like 73-year-old Pennsylvanian Robert Sammartino, it was only heard amongst the gossip of their peers and neighbors. Sammartino, born on August 6, 1941 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, was only 16 years old at the time of the launch of Sputnik, as he accounts his personal reactions to Sputnik 1's success. "We were behind at that point because they did it. This was completely unexpected, and everyone was kind of wondering if we could actually beat them. We had a space program, but we weren't really pushing. Back in those days, the United States and Russia were in strict competition with one another. They beat us." Sputnik challenged America, and the country contributed a huge effort to replicate the success of their challenger. Some inventions showed that the American intelligence was great, but not enough to show up the Soviets. All of these attempts were even a favorite among journalists and writers, as they frequently renamed them as Sputniks and infinite other variations of the original name. After the graves of these Sputniks, the United States got its big break in 1958 when it launched Explorer 1, designed durably by the U.S. Army. The project was credited to Wernher von Braun. Sammartino says, "Explorer 1 gave America a little bit of hope. Everyone was excited. I just remember everyone talking about it constantly for a little while, you know." President Eisenhower, full of pride and hope, approved a government-funded program specifically dedicated to space exploration, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, which is still up and running today, located in Florida. It wasn't surprising that soon afterwards, that the Soviet space probe Luna 2 was the first thing to strike the moon. Their success continued in 1961. On April 12, Vostok 1, a Soviet shuttle, was launched into space with the first ever passenger, Yuri Gagarin, aboard. The 27-year-old astronaut ended up being the first man in space to survive, and this was a huge accomplishment due to the extensive amount of unknown results that could have been created. The survival was almost not going to happen, as Gagarin experienced forces up to 8 times the pull of gravity, but he pulled through and remained conscious. He was soon after parachuted back to Earth, another dangerous stunt. The United States knew that if they were going to also achieve in sending astronauts into space, they needed to create safer methods as compared to the Soviet Union's techniques. Their budget might have not supported this, however, luckily, from 1961 to 1964, NASA was gifted with a 500% budget increase in extreme assistance. In a matter of weeks, they were able to shoot Alan Shepard, the first American astronaut, into space. The launch seemed like an accomplishment, but the short distance he flew hadn't compared to Gagarin, who orbited the entire planet. The goal was abruptly altered when John F. Kennedy presented and proposed the target to the world on May 25, 1961. The president wanted to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade. The impossible was ripped out of the shadows. This would bring the United States back from embarrassment and the country would appear stronger. San Martino states that he remembers, JFK seemed really motivated and excited. He seemed confident in his plan. He notes that no one really thought about it really. They were getting excited. It didn't seem possible. I didn't think it was possible myself. Americans were wondering if it was even safe or attemptable to visit the mysterious glowing disk that had made itself seen on the planet. It just seemed like JFK was being too unrealistic, but NASA had a different opinion about this. They began to take matters into their own hands and began working immediately on the mission. Kennedy had noted in his speech that although completing this mission would put the U.S. at an advantage in the space race, even with a highly funded space program, it would be a timely and technological struggle. This proved to be true, but the success of the first American astronaut, John Glenn, orbited the moon helped America to realize their goal, and JFK's wish might be possible. The official project for sending the men to the moon was founded and called Apollo. The project involved constant effort and attention from 34,000 NASA employees and 375,000 employees of industrial and university contractors. After the upsetting assassination of JFK in 1963, a few years later, NASA had almost completed their goal in January 1967 when their space shuttle was in launching position. Unfortunately, they experienced a setback when it exploded in the launching process, killing the 3 astronauts inside. For the United States, they had received more time when the seemingly immortal Soviet space program was set back when the untimely death of their chief engineer Sergei Korolev took place. In December 1968, Apollo 8 became the first manned shuttle to orbit the entire moon, and on July 16, 1969, the moment that every American had been anticipating arrived. 3 more astronauts, Neil Armstrong, Mike Collins, and Buzz Aldrin, boarded NASA's own Apollo 11. The event was televised and broadcasted to every television set in America. On July 20, 1969, San Martino was down the Jersey Shore surrounded by family and gossip from visitors, and he had been there since earlier that week on July 15th. He found out that NASA had successfully launched Apollo 11 on the television and through conversations of his neighbors on the exact date of the takeoff on July 16, 1969. I felt hopeful but also hesitant of its success. On July 20th, he was in the living room with everyone when they turned on the television set again. The news was jam-packed with the news that Apollo 11 had successfully landed on the moon. It was strange timing because he states no other countries were really contributing anything at that moment. The Soviet Union was still trying to recover from the death of their primary engineer, and Apollo 8 was launched around 8 months before. Neil Armstrong became the first man ever to walk on the moon, and Buzz Aldrin became the second. The 2 of them placed a sign on the moon, stating that we were the first country to reach the moon. A few samples from the moon were also taken and studied by Mike Collins, who stayed on the shuttle to collect data the entire trip. San Martino told me that his family was proud and excited. America was now ahead of the Soviets. I was also excited and waiting to see what we had in store for the future. He later says, "The success sparked the advancement of technology and space travel for our country. To teens like myself, we really don't talk about what happens in our country, including our nation's space program. This is partially due to the lack of successful and popular projects created by NASA today, as well as their stronger and different interests in technology, music, etc. To me personally, I had known of Apollo 11 and the American lunar landing, but nothing about the space race until last month. While researching this topic, which particularly interests me during my research on the early Cold War, I began to learn that we as Americans work together to make the impossible possible. NASA was created out of nothing, and our nation learns from our mistakes, for example, our various Apollo creations. But what I also learned is that our success was driven by competition, which is a continuous issue that still exists today. The space race was created through showing off and being the best. America was so concerned of how other nations view us instead of focusing on our well-being and survival. By interviewing my grandfather, Robert San Martino, I quickly picked up on the fact that he witnessed an extremely crucial string of events in our nation's history, and I got to truly understand how Americans themselves feel about our government and their decisions without our input. Some people's opinions also differed, like San Martino's. The space race brought both tragedy and death, but the feud created by the United States and the Soviet Union eventually fizzled out, and our success and societal advancement remained, creating the new and improved society we all know today as our own.